Who's black? Who's white? And who cares? One researcher challenges us to re-examine our self-identity. She explores the extent to which historical definitions of race continue to shape contemporary racial identities and lived experiences of racial difference. Through a series of interviews and profiles, we come to realize race is not black and white. The book, One Drop, Shifting the Lens on Race. The researcher, Yaba Blay. And you're listening to Lit Society. Let's get lit. Hey y'all, this is Kari.
And this is Alexis.
And you're listening to Lit Society, a podcast about books and drama. Hello, Alexis, my dear friend. How you doing?
Friend. I'm tired.
Yeah, me too.
I am tired.
We had a little come-to moment where we decided we're going to eat better.
Yeah, we did.
Maybe we should read a book about vegetables.
That's
and
a good
have like
one.
a challenge. We've done that before. I don't know if you remember when I was little, you made me do the I got it somewhere too. The South Beach diet. I was just a little child. And
Stop it. I did not make you do that.
You
was like, you want to play? And I said, okay, I'll play.
And you had me in the gym with strep throat. You know, I'm very competitive.
You are.
And we had these streaks of, for real, this was probably like 20 years ago. We was like testing who could go to the gym for the longest.
Yes,
or so. And I was in the gym with strep throat. I ain't care nothing about the people on the left to the right. I was coughing, hacking, and running.
Today you couldn't get away with that.
I wouldn't even try. I care more about humanity. But anyway.
Thank goodness.
Aside from fatigue, what's been up with you?
Oh, nothing. I'm working, more working. I'm in the office 3 days a week. I think I already said that, but I'm in the office 3 days a week now. And I got to play ping pong. My ping pong partner is back in the office. So we got to play on Friday. And that was great. I love that.
I don't know if y'all know, but Alexis works for like a ritzy law office. And the office is like a country club. So they got Peloton bikes, private showers, and a whole coffee shop, self-serve coffee shop. Is really cool. Anyway, well, that's nice for you.
How about you, Kari? Tell me something about yourself.
As a once upon a time photographer, you know that I've covered Lollapalooza for like 4 or 5 years in a row. This will be the first year I'm not covering it in a long time. And I've been keeping up with Music Fest culture, I guess. And it's alarming. Like there are this weekend, or I guess last weekend now, hundreds of millions of thousands of myriads of people in Miami for Rolling Loud. And it is terrifying. Yeah. It is terrifying. And I think the mayor of Miami was like, everyone be safe. There are vaccine booths throughout the festival.
Oh.
Girl, that ain't how vaccines work. What is going on?
Yeah, what does that mean? So if I'm from Chicago and I come, I can get a vaccine?
And then how did you get here? Are you getting back on a plane and taking your diseases back to your home? Of course you are.
Maybe they're only giving out the Johnson & Johnson.
Oh, yeah. Do you really? Never mind. I ain't going to say nothing. So I got issues with Johnson & Johnson, but that's fine. So I'm feeling like, man, you know, it's beautiful outside. I am about to go to the beach after we record. Are you coming, by the way, to the beach?
Pass.
Okay.
Today. Well, I love the beach, but I have to pass this week.
Well, I feel like Chicago's beaches are underrated. I'm going. We always go to the beach as much as we can. And I'm not going to do the festival circuit, but I get it. Like people are eager to get back to normal, but we got to be careful. Anyway, I sound like an auntie. Moving on to our theme of the week. Well, this week, readers, we're not going to have a theme of the week because our book is going to be a discussion between Alexis and myself. Is that correct, Alexis?
Yeah, pretty much. After I give you the intro, the historical information. Yeah.
Okay, well then why don't we take a quick break and we'll go straight into some author context. How does that sound?
Sounds great.
All right, let's go. please give us some background on our author, Yaba Blay? I love that name, Yaba Blay, and perhaps her inspiration for creating One Drop, Shifting the Lens on Race.
Okay, so Dr. Yaba Blay is a Ghanaian American born, and raised in New Orleans. She earned a Master of Arts and PhD in African American Studies with distinction and a graduate certificate in Women's Studies from Temple University. She also holds a Master's of Education in Counseling Psychology from the University of New Orleans. Dr. Yaba Blay is a scholar activist, public speaker, and cultural consultant whose scholarship work and practice centers on the lived experiences of Black women and girls with a particular focus on identity, body politics, and beauty practices. She's launched several viral campaigns, including Locks of Love, hashtag Pretty Period, hashtag Professional Black Girl, hashtag Pretty Period highlights dark-skinned women, and hashtag Professional Black Girl highlights Black girls who take being a Black girl very seriously to professional levels, in fact. In 2012, Dr. Blay served as a producer on CNN's television documentary, Who is Black in America? Do you remember that?
I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. She's appeared on major networks, been featured in magazines. Her commentary is featured in a permanent installation exhibit in the National Museum of African American History and Culture, A Changing America 1968 and Beyond. One Drop, Shifting the Lens on Race was published in 2021, but I think she started the work back in 2011. Yeah, she is widely respected as one of the foremost thought leaders on Black racial identity, colorism, and beauty politics. She's globally sought after speaker and consultant, and she's spoken at Spelman, Harvard, New York University. She started her research after she was on a panel with Rosa Clemente, and Rosa identified as a Black
Puerto Rican, no? Latina?
Yeah, and Rosa identified as a Black Puerto Rican, and it distracted Dr. Blay to the point of wanting to learn more. So that began her dive into the One Drop.
Yeah, and I mean, this book was first published in February of 2021, so just this year. Mm-hmm. And I don't show any copyrights that precedes that time. Yeah. So I think, I'm not sure if this research just took so long. She is interviewing real life people, having their portrait taken in a way where they feel best represented. And she considers this work collaborative in that her subjects were like editors of it also. They were able to edit their story. Usually your subject doesn't get to see the final result until it's published. She didn't want it to be that way because it is so personal. So it talks about the self-identity of everyone featured in this book. So it was important to her that they were able to self-edit their words also. So maybe that just took long. But yeah, this has been a few years in the making.
Anything else you wanted to share?
I thought it was cool that as she was distracted, she says, by this woman identifying as a Black person, but also Puerto Rican, she didn't allow that to make her even more resolved in whatever she believed. She was willing to not confront and question, but open a dialogue with this woman. And then that made her curious. She has this curiosity that I like about society that I thought was really cool and is very rare. There were some 1-star reviews I saw on Goodreads where people were upset that she approached this book in the context of a Black woman interviewing other Black people. They thought that she should interview some people of mixed race that identified as white. However, she did the work. And so if anyone else wants to make a book about people who identify as white, but are of mixed race, or if she even wants to do that in the future, fine. But this book doesn't have to be all things. And that's a little pet peeve of mine, instead of doing the work on your own. And then some people felt too like this should have been written by a mixed race person. Okay, well, it can be. This subject is not without its nuance. And definitely the mantle can be taken up again by anyone. But she did this research and, put some thought into it. So we can just accept that for what it is in this little book, in this one book, I should say. Well, thank you for that, Alexis. Now, can you please give us a no spoilers brief synopsis of the book?
Sure. Dr. Blay wants us to examine our perceptions of Blackness. So we start with the beginning and the end of the one drop rule. Then dive into the personal stories of our contributors to find Blackness ranging from South Africa to the Netherlands, from the U.S. to Brazil. Kari, who do you think would enjoy reading this book?
This discussion has been done to death regarding who is Black, what is Black. However, if you are interested in how people identify themselves and why, then I think you'd be interested in this book. It's not judging anyone. It's letting people say, hey, I identify as this, and this is why I do. And to me, that provides context that's often missing from this conversation. Usually there's an expert that's like, well, because of history, this means this.
Right.
But this is saying, well, maybe we've outgrown that history, because this is now how a plethora of people throughout the diaspora are defining themselves. Mm-hmm. And we should look at that and ask ourselves if we are holding on to racist philosophy. So, yeah, if you're interested in a new look at the same conversation, then I think this book is for you. And Alexis, what were your first thoughts of One Drop shifting the lens on race?
Let me just say first that I remember one time, a very long time ago, when we were talking about somebody of mixed race, and I said, they're Black. And you said, how do you know? And I said, because of the one drop rule. But your response always made me question my response. So I was interested in reading this book because Dr. Blay, on her Professional Black Girl IG page, would often post Meghan Markle. And people would say, she's not Black, you need to stop posting her. And Dr. Blay always pushed back. So I wanted to see her thoughts when she talked about releasing her book. I wanted to see her thoughts. Not that I felt one way or the other about it. I just wanted to see her thoughts.
Yeah, you were intrigued by this dialogue she was conducting with folks on social media, and you wanted to know clearly from her own words, what was she thinking? She's a doctor. She's organized her thoughts. What are those thoughts? Mm-hmm. And you give me a lot more credit than I deserve, but we'll talk about that later. So, all right. Well, then without further ado, are you ready for a deep dive into One Drop, Shifting the Lens on Race by Yaba Blay? Spoiler filled, if that can even be a thing.
Yeah. And so I want to say it'll have spoilers and that we're going to talk about the history, but the history is researchable. That's like public information. The spoilers are when we talk about the actual stories of the people. And I think we're going to limit those stories and then have a overall conversation about the book.
Okay. Sounds good. I'm ready.
So in 1977, Susie Galori Phepps and her husband started planning a vacation to South America. And in order to apply for the passports needed to travel, Susie wrote to the Louisiana Bureau of Vital Records for a copy of her birth certificate. And we've been here before. But lo and behold, dear Susie found out her certificate identified her as a colored child born to colored parents.
And this was a woman that had lived her entire race white in a white world. Yes. So this was shocking, you guys.
Absolutely shocking.
She was shocked.
So
throwback to White Like Her. Check out that episode. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So Susie and her 6 siblings began an unsuccessful 5-year, $20,000 court battle to change the race classification on their birth certificates from color to white. And the state's 1970 racial classification statute declared unconstitutional. So they wanted the statute declared unconstitutional, and they wanted their classification changed to white because, as Kari said, they had all grown up white. They only know whiteness. The law that they were trying to get changed said, in signifying race, a person having 1/32 or less of Negro blood shall not be deemed, described, or designated by any public official in the state of Louisiana as colored, mulatto, a black, Negro, Griff, an Afro-American, a quadroon, a mestizo, a colored person, or a person of color. So that's the law they want to change. Geologists were hired by the state to determine, and they determined that Susie had 3/32 Negro blood. Okay. Her four greats, was a Black woman who was enslaved by a French Louisiana planter named Joseph Gregory Gallory. Until the time of her birth in 1934, her ancestors were classified as quadroons, mulattoes, and colored. One of her first cousins testified that Susie's father was a colored man, just like the rest of them. No matter how white Susie lived, she lost big. And even though the state repealed the statute of racial classification that same year, they did not make it retroactive. Susie is still legally Black.
There's a paragraph. She felt like she lost that case. I'm like, you lost, but you Black. Oh.
There is a paragraph
Sound
in the
like
book
you won to me. Okay, go ahead.
that asks, what exactly is Blackness? What does it mean to be Black? Is Blackness a matter of biology or consciousness? Who determines who is Black and who is not? The state, the society, or the individual? Who is Black? Who is not? Who cares? In the U.S., historically, a Black person is defined as any person with any known Black ancestry. And that's where we come to the one-drop rule, meaning that one single solitary drop of Black blood is enough to render a person Black. Therefore, a person with any trace of Black ancestry, however small or invisible, cannot be considered white, unless that person has other non-white ancestry that they can claim. They must be considered Black. And this was big in Virginia. The one-drop rule became a legal reality in the state of Virginia in 1705. And by 1910, it was the law of the land in almost all the southern U.S. states. This rule functioned to protect and preserve white racial purity. Back then, you were either Black or white, period. No in between. The one-drop rule is American. No other nation relies on this formula. Under colonial enslavement, Blackness, prototypical or phenotypical African features, such as the dark skin, a broad nose, tightly coiled hair, were the markers of inferiority. If you were white, you were free. If you were Black, you were enslaved. Early on, there were more Blacks than whites. And while interracial relations were discouraged and publicly punished, it was extremely commonplace. Whites were afraid of losing control over the enslaved population, and under those fears were psychological fears. In order to maintain white supremacy, whiteness needed to remain pure. They believed that race mixing led to lower quality humans and threatened the survival of the white race. Blackness was considered a contaminant, one poisonous enough to taint and cripple the entire gene pool. Maintaining that color line had to be unquestionably clear. There were miscegenation laws, and these laws defined marriage and sometimes sex between the races as criminal. Mm-hmm. But these laws were an attempt to police the behavior of whites. In traditional English common law, it held that children take the state of their father. However, laws were changed frequently to maintain white supremacy. So now if a white man impregnated a Black woman, the law took him off the hook. He didn't have to support, even claim that child. If the mother was his property, he gained an additional property, another source of labor and income.
So this was really eye-opening to me. We've talked about how race only came after the racism. So people wanted a way to categorize and dominate others. And so they created race and defined what makes what. And in all of those actual laws and legislation, they decided that a child would always take on the legislation,
status,
they defined, that the child would always take on the slavery status of the mother. That means that if a white landowner rapes I'm sorry to use that word. If a white landowner sexually assaults a Black woman and that Black woman produces a child, he is able to say that child is now also my property. But if a white woman were to be impregnated by a Black man, let's say voluntarily, that Black child all of a sudden does not get the status of the mother. As far as slavery is concerned, that child would also be considered a slave. So it bent just for the patriarchal benefit.
And
it was,
Go ahead.
I just thought that was very, not that we didn't already know that, but for this type of evilness to be so blatant is pretty shocking.
Mm-hmm. And so it's kind of sanctioned the sexual abuse of enslaved women.
I was going to say it allowed owners to even have like evil games that they would play with the neighboring landowner. Who can make more property? Who can impregnate more slaves to build up their property and make more money?
That's gross.
Yeah. And it's a situation that dehumanizes not just the victim, but also the one victimizing. Now they're both treated like animals. And it's one thing to decide you want to be treated like an animal. You want to be the buck, the breeder. But then to do something like that to another person, it's just evil. It's just evil.
This also allowed them to limit access to privilege and concentrate white power. During this antebellum period, this group of people, this mixed race people, they're described as white and black, are now called by the term mulatto. And that's taken from the Portuguese and Spanish term meaning young mule.
Mule. The mix between a horse and a donkey.
So since Virginia was, quote, swarming with mulattoes, end quote, this forced the state to quickly put laws in place to address the problems it posed. The color line was blurring. There was no longer a clear delineation between black and white. So Virginia became the first state to outline a formulaic definition of race in its ban against interracial marriage. In 1705, it defined a Negro as the child, grandchild, or great-grandchild of a Negro or anyone who was at least 1/8 Negro, making mulattoes black. And other southern states quickly adopted this definition well into the 20th century. Texas said anyone with any blood of the African race in their veins is black. No matter how white you appear, if you have a drop of black blood, you are considered black and they're treated accordingly. Now let's talk about New Orleans. We talked about this a little bit in the book by Gail Lukasik, White Like Her. Mm-hmm. New Orleans had that multi-tier system developed where whites held the highest status and blacks, of course, the lowest. And then there were the free people of color, aka Creoles of color. They held this intermediate or kind of a buffer position, and they enjoyed privileges of freedom since the beginning of French rule in 1718. The term Creole is a Latin word meaning to beget or create, and the Creoles were a result of generations of intermixing between Europeans, French and Spanish, Africans, enslaved and free, and indigenous people. And unlike other regions of the country, in colonial Louisiana, amalgamation was widespread, tolerated, sometimes encouraged, and thus whites rejected, whites in New Orleans, that is, the one-drop rule. Even though Creoles weren't given the privileges afforded whites, they were given more privileges than blacks. Creoles were presumed free, blacks were not. And you see where I'm going with this, right? Mm-hmm. Division, upholding of white supremacy. Having white ancestry was socially advantageous, creating a division between the blacks and the Creoles. Creoles were reared to believe they were superior to blacks. There were even laws that kept Creoles and blacks separated. Creoles were encouraged to adhere to the color line of privilege. In New Orleans, Creoles made up a significant portion of the city's doctors, lawyers, businessmen, and other educated professionals. Some even owned their own slaves. Creoles went to great lengths to maintain the race by even preserving or lightening the skin color of their descendants. Creole women and black women saw it advantageous to have relationships with white men, even though they couldn't marry them, and it was against the law. So prior to 1864, the term used was amalgamation. During the 1864 presidential election, it was decided that a term needed to specifically refer to the mixing of races. So they combined a Latin term meaning to mix with genus, meaning race or stock, and created a term that sounded more scientific and more ominous.
This is studied in labs.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And miscegenation sounded more like a mistaken mixture or was unnatural. And so they could use that. And then they started enforcing anti-miscegenation laws. Then states started adopting the one-drop rule across the entire southern region. And guess who was now out of their privileged spot?
The Creoles.
Yeah, you guessed it. That elite middle class of people, the Creoles, and all other associated titles.
And
now,
by that, I mean they got their property taken. Some were even enslaved. This is a drastic upheaval of a whole group of people, essentially a race of people.
A race of people, yeah.
This is like a mini genocide where people are being added to the larger genocide that's already going on. Mm-hmm. And yeah, Creoles look down on a lot of Negroes or Black people, but they're all victims of white supremacy. And it's like sad and unfair, unjust all around.
Yeah. And so now, rather than be considered Black, they had to decide whether they wanted to be white passing.
And that might mean white, never seeing your family again in a culture that is very family centric. You either avail yourselves to the privilege of society by turning your back on your family, maybe even with your family's consent, like go and live a great life as a white person because you look white, or you choose to suffer with the people, the common people, the Black people.
Yeah. It wasn't an easy decision. So I imagine there's quite a few people out there like Gail Lukasik who are not aware of their strand of Black in their veins.
Because their ancestors were passing.
Mm-hmm. I thought this was interesting, and I'd never heard it before, but the one-drop ideology of Blackness was at the crux of many of the arguments against enslavement. And here's why. There were white-appearing children that were enslaved.
Yeah.
So white abolitionists began a photographic propaganda campaign that showed that these white children being born into enslavement were being sold. And from that angle, Southern slavery was a threat to the freedom of all white people, because if these white appearing children could be enslaved, so too could any other seemingly white person.
Yeah, people really bit into this, but essentially these were white slaves because the landowner, sexual assault of slave women was so prevalent that there were a lot of mixed children, to the point where if a slave owner is now assaulting someone who's of mixed race, their children look white. Mm-hmm. So people would come over to the plantation like guests and ask, "Oh, I didn't know you had another daughter." And the wife would have to go, "Oh, no, that's one of the slave children." And then people would go, oh, I know your life. Mm-hmm. So it was embarrassing.
Yeah.
And then the abolitionists were like, well, these are essentially white children now and they're enslaved. Maybe we can get people to give up on slavery by showing them these white children. I don't think there was any real threat that now white people are going to start enslaving each other.
Well, I guess if you didn't like somebody, you could, right? You could just create a campaign.
That person could go, well, these are my parents and these are my grandparents. You know what I mean?
Well, you could. But what if a person came into town and they didn't know their background, right?
So what I would do, I wouldn't have been free long, because I would have went straight to the house of whatever Wahite person had abused me the most and said, cousin, don't you remember me? And then I would make a scene and go, cousin, please, why are you treating me like this? Mm-hmm. And now everybody gonna think, wait, are you colored? Luke?
And next thing
you know, Luke Johnson a colored man? Yep, he is.
Next thing you know, Luke is enslaved.
Yep.
So the book then goes on to show these pictures of white appearing enslaved children next to Black enslaved children. It don't look good to the white person, right?
To us, it don't look good because these are human slaves. But to white people at the time, all they see are the white children being enslaved, and that's wrong.
And you know what? I can see how this creates a people who are against slavery, but that's for self-preservation, not necessarily because they believe Blacks are equal human beings, right?
Yeah.
So now after slavery was abolished, there's some case law that we can look into. Whites and Blacks found themselves in this newfound competition for jobs. So the need to maintain Blacks in the lowest social position intensified the nation's need to define and categorize them. There's two very significant cases. Enter the case of Plessy v. Ferguson. And this is the United States Supreme Court's ruling that defined Blackness. They didn't. I don't think that was their intent, and it advanced the separate but equal doctrine. In this case, Homer Adolph Plessy was white passing and wanted to be allowed to ride in the white train car. This kind of makes me think of the Rosa Parks, but with train cars.
Yeah, of course.
And yet still different. The Plessy wanted to fight racial categorization. However, constrained by the racial concepts of the time, their argument focused excessively on whether or not Plessy should be categorized as Black given his white appearance. Thus, Plessy's attorneys accepted race as a category at the same time as they argued the law ought not use race as a basis for determining citizens' rights. The Supreme Court upheld the lower court's decision and said the separate but equal was constitutional and added a judicial note to state a Negro or Black is any person with any Black ancestry. This is now on law books. So one need not look Black in order to be considered Black. And the Supreme Court, in effect, sanctioned the one-drop rule. By 1925, almost every state has some form of one-drop law on the books. And if you notice, I mentioned previously that the southern states were adopting these rules, but now we're in 1925, and it's no longer limited to the southern states. It's really spreading. And
it's federal law.
Mm-hmm. And as the one-drop reality set in, it became, as the one-drop reality set into American consciousness, race relations shifted. In 1958, there's a new case, the second case. Richard Loving, a white man, married Mildred Jeter, a woman of Black and Native American descent. It was legal for them to marry in Washington, D.C., illegal in Virginia. The Lovings were arrested and pled guilty. They bargained that they would receive no jail time if they left the state for at least 25 years. After 8 years and several lawsuits, their case reached the Supreme Court, which unanimously overturned their convictions. And in the ruling, the Supreme Court concluded that anti-miscegenation and the one-drop rule was unconstitutional. Louisiana was the last to repeal its law on racial classification, which they did in 1983. And Alabama was the last state to repeal its law.
When did they do that?
Interracial marriage.
Yesterday.
In 2000. Alabama in 2000. Interracial marriage was against the law. So it's the end of the one-drop rule. The multiracial population in the U.S. has grown dramatically with the projection that by 2050, 1 in 5 Americans may identify as multiracial. Look, the book explores the extent to which historical definitions of race continue to shape contemporary racial identities and lived experiences of racial difference, particularly among those whom the legacy of the one-drop rule perceptibly lingers. But before we discuss some personal stories, let's talk a bit about other countries. In many places, any one drop of something else is enough to render that person something else. Let's talk about Latin America. They saw whiteness as cleansing and purifying. So they saw race mixing as diluting the population. So they attempted to whiten their population via a political agenda that encouraged individuals to reproduce with those lighter or whiter than themselves.
Yeah, so whereas in the States, the white race was widely considered by the ruling class to be pure already. And we want to keep out any mixture because we don't want the milk to be unclean. It must remain pristine white, patrician. Mm-hmm. In other parts of the world and throughout some islands, the idea was we'll bring in white people because that'll help purify your race. And this fit the agenda of transient white men who were coming in as sailors or as merchants and who weren't going to stay long. Mm-hmm, their political agenda was, well, we want to do whatever we want with the women when we're here. Mm-hmm. So mix with us because we're going to help clean your race. And and your lighter children will have some privileges, and who doesn't want their children to have privileges? Right. Yeah. That's the juxtaposition that she described well, I thought.
Yeah. Kari talks about the Caribbean a little bit. And then there's also within the Caribbean, the social and political and economic power is concentrated among those who are mixed. So color and class are inextricably linked. There's discriminatory treatment based on skin tone. Color-coded social structures exist in Trinidad and Tobago. and Guyana, where they have identifiers such as Coolie, which is a person of East Indian descent, a Creole who is a local person, a native, a Dougla, which is a person of mixed African and East Indian descent, and then Chinese, someone of Asian descent. And these identifiers are based on phenotypical appearances rather than their genetic makeup. So those who appear to be primarily African descent, again, are at the bottom of the social hierarchy.
Yeah, she describes how on the continent of Africa, oftentimes if you look Black, you're Black. There are very few people who identify as mixed race. It's widely acceptable to identify as a whole instead of a part. So if you look white, you are white. And if you look Black, you are Black.
Yeah. And that's really it. But then if you go into South Africa, then you through the apartheid regime, there's the categories. Everybody's categorized. And that mixedness had that hierarchy still.
Yeah, and there are great details on how that hierarchy came to exist and what it looked like for the people who live there in our episode Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Go back and listen to that show. It's great.
So now we have a bit of history and understanding. Let's dive into personal stories. Dr. Blay did a series of interviews with 70 individuals representing 25 different countries. The majority live in the U.S., 8 reside in Brazil, Canada, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, the Netherlands, and the United Kingdom. Her final pool of contributors consisted of 34 women and 24 men who ranged from 21 to 103 years old. They responded to the following questions. How do you identify? Racially? Culturally? Upon meeting you for the first time, what do people usually assume about your identity? Do people question your Blackness? What is it about you that causes people to question your identity? Has your skin color or racial identity affected your ability to form, maintain social relationships? Many people, and the final question is, many people assume that with light skin comes benefits. What benefits do you realize or have you experienced? Similarly, what liabilities, disadvantages have you realized or experienced? Although contributors use a variety of terms to self-identify, they all see themselves as part of a larger racial and cultural group, generally referred to as Black people. Dr. Blay wants us to envision multiple possibilities for Blackness above and beyond the one-drop rule. Kari, are there personal stories that stand out to you that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so she considers this, like we said, a collaborative work, and one of her main contributors or collaborators, partners on this project, was the photographer that shot the subjects being interviewed. Her name is Noelle. And Noelle considers herself Haitian. I thought this was really interesting because I have Haitian people in my world who I love, and they don't look like her. She looks to me like a Latina woman. However, her father was of mixed race. He was Haitian Black, and his dad was Haitian Black, and his mom was, I think, German.
German and Haitian?
And then so he married a French woman, I think. So she has mixed blood, but it includes Haitian blood. And, that's a culture that she identifies with. And so she calls herself Haitian. And that often shocks people. She is often in a situation where strangers are politely asking her to prove her ethnicity because she looks Latina. One quote from her that I'd like to read directly from the book goes a little something like this. She says, being Haitian has always been an important part of my identity, but for me, the path to understanding what it means to be Haitian has been complicated. In the Haitian context, it seems absurd for me to identify as Black, especially since I don't look like what they would consider Black, which is what the majority of the Haitian population looks like. Like my father, I am considered mulatto. And given the history of colonialism, as well as colonial's violence in Haiti, my skin color is associated with privilege, end quote. There are 2 words in this in this section that stuck out to me. And it's when she said, I don't look like what they would consider Black. And that really emphasizes how race in itself is just a social construct, which we say all the time. But it's true. It has no scientific backing. It's all about perception, and perception is relative. So how can you have laws based on something that's not concrete? And unchanging.
Yeah, that's like, though, in South Africa, when they were making these rules for apartheid, it was just so
nonsensical, arbitrary.
Yeah.
It reminds me, too, of Gail Lucasic's example where some in her family were born Black and died white. Now, that is insane. So it just shows that it makes no sense. Also, Soledad O'Brien, she looks like a Latina woman to me. She does have some edges that makes me think she's a sister. However, she is Latina. She is Black. She considers herself Black. Her dad is white and Australian, and her mom is Afro-Cuban. She also has a couple points that I'd like to bring out. First of all, she gives the example of Britney Spears, who may have an embarrassing situation. White people do not say, oh my God, I'm so embarrassed for us. Can you believe what Britney is doing to us? Because every white person does not represent the white race. Whereas with Black people, it's often said within our communities and outside of it, wow, look at what that Black person did. Why are Black people always doing that? And it leads to a situation where you don't feel free to be yourself in all the nuance that makes up your personality, because you have to fit in the category that's defined for you by people of your race and people outside of your race based on their perceptions and their ideas. And that's no way to live. She also has a quote here that I like. She says, technically, I'm mixed. I have one parent who's Black. I have one parent who's white. I identify as Black. I had a good friend in college who on paper had the same racial makeup as I did. Her dad was Black. Her mom was white. A girl who looked like me. And people would say, oh, you're Black. And she'd be like, nope, absolutely not. I never felt like it was up to me to take it a step further and say, well, you're denying your...
I'm sorry.
I generally don't care. My thing is, if you say so, you look Black to me. But if that's going to be your thing, okay. I identified so much with that quote. And we'll talk about this more later in the episode. But I really picked that out. That stuck with me because I have been in that position where, girl, you Black. I've definitely said that to people. Girl, you Black. What are you doing? This is a cool club to be a part of, and you have entrance. Why are you denying it? What is wrong with you? That's the subtext. And then she also talks about how her children look white, but she tells them that they're Black, and that's her right as a parent.
They talked about that with Halle Berry as well, right?
Yeah. So Soledad's children are multiracial, but because their grandmother's Black, and because their mother identifies as Black, they're Black. And that makes sense to me. Or at least it did at one time. And then lastly, I want to talk about Christina Robinson, who identifies not just as Black, but Black from Louisiana. And I just want to reiterate that we're talking in the context of race and not ethnicity. She identifies her race as Black from Louisiana. And it makes me think of how Beyonce loves to say she's Creole. And people have a problem with that because it feels like you are harking back to this time historically when Creoles thought they were better than Black people, and you're trying to say you're better. But the truth is, Creoles have a culture that is unique and specific to Creole people from Louisiana. And you don't have to blend that with Black people. You can be proud of both your Blackness, your Creole-ness, and whatever else, whether it be French or Spanish, which is common with Creole people. That all brings different histories, different foods, different forms of music that don't have to just disappear in the comfortable category of Black. You know?
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And so Christina is one of these people who, to me, she looks like she could be maybe Latina, maybe Native American, but she is Black from Louisiana. She is Creole, and she's a mixed race person who does not neatly fit into categories. So I really liked her story and how she identifies. So she says, just like white folks have to understand and accept what white privilege is, I have to accept that gradations in skin color also matter. We just have to be honest. No matter what color you are on the spectrum of blackness, there is a difference in the way we are treated in life. And that is so true. So I liked her example.
I'm sorry. It was another person that kind of said that, I think it was Rosa Clemente. In her story, she said, I am identifying as a Black Puerto Rican. However, I know that I am not experiencing what a dark-skinned Black person is experiencing. And I acknowledge that. I'm not going to fight you toe-to-toe about that, but I'm going to be Black. You could be Black. But I will never claim to understand your experience.
What you're going through. And that's the same in Black Americans. Lighter skinned Black Americans may have a different experience than darker skinned Black Americans. You cannot deny that because someone says they went through this and you didn't, that they are wrong or they're seeing it in the wrong way. No, respect people's insight into their own lives.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing that, Kari. Let's take a quick break before we get into our final verdict and recommendation.
Okay, sounds good.
And welcome back. So, Kari,
yes.
What is your final verdict, and would you recommend this book?
So there's a Goodreads reviewer who gave it a 1-star review, and I just want to say, I want to quote her quickly. She says, the one-drop rule doesn't fully make sense outside of the United States, so I don't see why this relic of American slavery should be a chosen basis of a global Black identity. And I want to address that quickly. End quote, by the way. I want to address what she said quickly. Some people, and I'm not saying her, but some people feel like racism died with slavery. But the residual effects of what this did to a people and to a country, both whites and Blacks in the country, live on even today. So beyond slavery, beyond Jim Crow, I mean, we just talked about how interracial marriage was made legal in Alabama
in 2000,
21 years ago. That is a sign of how the ruling classes, and I mean Black and white people in positions of power, see the history of this country. Either it's not worth addressing, let's just ignore it. And a lot of laws are not taken off the books because of that, because people don't think it's worth the time to address. Right. It's highly unlikely you're going to be arrested in Alabama in 1995 because you are part of a mixed race couple. However, the fact that that was law says something about the legislative practice overall of the state and of the country. You have to accept that at least. So no, this book does not address how every Black person across the world sees themselves. It's specifically talking about how Black Americans see themselves in the context of historically how Black people have been treated in this country. And I think when it does touch on Caribbean Blackness, when it touches even on African Blackness, it's not thorough because that's not what this book is about. Right. So it gives you just a bit of that history. And yeah, if you're looking for just an overall understanding of how Black people across the world see themselves and why, I don't know what book is going to give that to you.
And so if I could add, she specifically talks about how the one drop rule is a very American thinking that
she's made it clear
hasn't gone away, but it has affected so many people. She even talks about how people who come from other countries are affected by that one drop rule when they come here.
But I get it. I remember visiting. I used to go to Canada semi-often, and I remember meeting friends for the first time, and they're like, well, what's your background? And I'd say, I'm Black. Yeah, but what are you? And I get that. I do get it. So there was a point in America when the one drop rule was used to categorize and control people. But somehow along the way, it became a test for entrance into like an exclusive club that had created things and done things the world's never seen. And I'm a member of that club. And the club wouldn't be exclusive if just everyone could be in it. You understand? Or could just join it when it felt convenient. So club entrance requires a cost. And once you're in, you can say, look what I did. Look what my people did. Look what my parents did. Despite everything that happened to us, look what we created. Look what we became and look who we are. Wow. I'm still very much enjoying being a member of that club, but I realized that this one drop rule is racist. It's racist, and it doesn't make sense for me as a Black woman to predicate it. So you asked me what I thought of this book. Listen, I've always identified as Black American, not as my race, but as my ethnicity. And I explain that as best as I can in our Black Card episode. So just like some people consider themselves Polish, German, or Italian, I identify as Black American, the descendant of slaves who created a new hybrid culture and way of living that's like emulated all over the world. That's who I am. Racially, I too have always identified as Black. That's different than who I am ethnically. Racially, I've always identified as Black, but I haven't always seen other Black people as Black like me. This book and other books we've read, including Stamped from the Beginning by Ibram X. Kendi and Jason Reynolds, has made me redefine my identity and how I see the world, honestly.
Interesting.
There's a viral clip of Arsenio Hall talking to Trevor Noah, where Trevor describes his connection throughout the diaspora, the African diaspora, as it pertains to our Black people's interactions with law enforcement. Like, you might not see me as Black, but when we talk about police, we're all on the same page. And so he's like, right away, I'm like, but how you see yourself is defined by your oppression. Like, I don't want to have anything to do with that. I get it, but that's not the measure that I want to use to say who I am and to see who I am by how badly I'm treated in society. In the end, I think it just comes to minding my business. It's not my job in my heart, and especially not openly, to police the identity of others. I'm still not down with everyone saying the N-word or claiming the history that is mine.
What about Rachel Dolezal?
Stop it. No, listen, let's be within reason. Let's be within reason. But you know what? I doubt I'll ever meet her, so I'm not going to allow her and her foolishness to take up any space, even fraction of my brain. That's none of my business. So yeah, I do feel somewhat of a release in a way. I no longer feel like the gatekeeper that I think I've quietly, taken up as a role for myself.
Oh, that's interesting.
I don't know where I got that from. Even when I was little, it's not from my parents. It's not from my friends. But anyway, I'm letting that responsibility go. It's not my job to say who's Black or who's not. I know what I am, but what you identify is your business. It's your business, unless we're at a concert and you're trying to say the N-word, I guess. Then
that's when it
becomes take that
important.
role back up again. Yeah.
Wait up. Hold on a second. I'm going to have to sort through wait. Ma'am, sir, I'm going to have you.
You are not a Black.
Remove that from your lingo because you are
security. Not. And then Alexis, when I think of my heroes and those I want to emulate, they're always the underdog. So, Moses denied the comforts of a royal life in order to suffer with God's people. And I think that there has always been a subconscious reasoning in my heart that privilege always comes with a level of ungodly evil. Ooh. And to be denied rights and privilege by society, by the majority, is nothing more than a sign of purity. And I think I'm using this reasoning too much another example. Do you know who Hannah Brockman is? She's like a DJ, influencer. Yeah.
I don't think so.
Well, she had tweeted once, I'm a Black woman, I am a white woman. And then she was crying on the internet. And I thought she was the most delusional person in the world because you can't have it both ways. You can't have the privilege and still be a part of the light of what's right. But truthfully, she she ain't a white woman, but that's because the rules of race were, because she's mixed race. Okay. So she sees herself as a whole of both races. But like mathematically, that's impossible. But also, more importantly, race was constructed and maintained with the goal of preserving white supremacy. And I don't want to have anything to do with that. So if she wants to say she's white, if anyone wants to say she's white, that's none of my business. If I see you as a Black woman, and this is what I love so much about Soledad's quote and how her thinking is, whatever, that's not my mantle to take up. Yep. That is not my war to fight. I am Black. I'm part of the African and Black diaspora. I am Black American ethnically, but who you are isn't for me to define. And this book helped me put a period on that thought. And so in that way, I appreciate it. Also, this is a book you have to read. There's no audio version, and it makes a great coffee table book. So I'd recommend it. And thank you for making me buy it. What about you after all of that? And I hope that made sense. I know I was all over the place.
Y'all tell
what
her
did you think
in the comments if you disagree or you feel some type of way about what she is saying. That is that woman's opinion, okay? That's her opinion on that.
Wait, me?
Yeah,
wait, who you talking about?
It's still your opinion. That's your opinion.
Yes, yes.
And you're entitled to it. So
what do you think of One Drop? And would you recommend it?
You know, the first time, I remember the first time I met a woman and she was white looking. And I met her through a friend. And I was just a teenager at the time. And this woman had to be like 40 or something. And she made a point. I didn't ask her. She made a point to tell me she was Black. I was like, oh, sure. Okay. Yeah.
If you say so.
If you say so. Right. I don't know her history. I didn't know. I mean, it was just that one moment. But my friend made sure she told me in advance that the woman says she's Black. You know, don't pay her no attention. That's what the woman says. But what I like about this is people's stories. I love reading people's stories, and because you can't take that away from them. That's what their experience is.
And you don't have the right to.
You don't. So I just like hearing them. I like to see how mixed race people make their decisions about who they are, who they decide to be, who they decide to identify as. That's why I appreciated, and you just mentioned it, the Black Heart book, because it was his story to tell. Like you said, it's a nice big coffee table book. You see these beautiful pictures of these people, and then you see their story, and you get to...
Yeah, you see their photo, and you can... decide in your heart, oh, this ain't really a Black person. This ain't really, whatever. And then you read their story and you're like, wow, who am I to say who they are?
Exactly. And that's how each story felt to me. Because you can look at them, and then think about where that person ain't Black. Where's that coming from? Mm-hmm. What is the origin of that? And we have it. Because that one drop rule is inherent, is in us, because that is what we learned. And so you have to think about
what are you really doing when you tell people or decide, even in your heart, silently, whether someone's Black or white. Mm-hmm. What are you doing? Yeah. You're predicating this one drop rule. Mm-hmm. You're saying that this rule still has a hold on my life and a place in society. Yeah. And we're kind of like... I mean, I love being Black. It's lit. And I don't think I'm ever going to get to the point where I'm like, well, I don't identify as anything racially. But in saying that, I have to also recognize that race is a construct used to cement white supremacy. Yeah. And I'm not down with that. Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I'm Black. I'm me. Me.
Worry about yourself.
Like me. Right.
Worry about yourself.
Worry about yourself.
So I enjoyed it. Definitely would recommend it. It's got great information, details. I like how it expanded up the New Orleans talk. I know Gail Lukasik went into great detail, but I was like, oh my God, this is so hard to read. But reading...
I still think that was ridiculous.
Yaba Blay having explained it, I get it. I get it now. I get it more than when I read Gail's, because Gail's was like a yawner. when she was explaining it. It was too much. It's more information
Girl,
than I needed.
Years in a limbo of who am I, an identity crisis, because there was a Negro in her lineage.
Yeah.
I can't, that's crazy to me. I mean, if you told me that, sat me down and said, Kari, I have to tell you, I think someone white was in one of your ancestors. How would I look? Denying it or, going crazy about it? Like, oh, that's so gross.
But what is that tied
to?
That's that purity of whiteness, that white supremacy. White supremacy is clearly like an overarching thing here. It's
exactly
so, and that's that's
evil. The machine producing the product, and there's no reason for us to maintain this product. But I'm Black. I just want to be clear on that.
Wait. I am Black.
I don't care what y'all are. I don't. Hey, listener, thank you for listening to the show. What are you? Okay, great. I don't care. I'm Black. Hey, you ain't never gonna take that from me.
You can't take that from me. You can't.
Logic.
You cannot take it from me. So, yeah.
One thing, I heard an interview with Yaba Blay also, and she was saying, instead of considering ourselves Black in American context, we could be attaching ourselves to this global Blackness. And in that way, we won't feel like the minority because mathematically we are not the minority. Right. We are the majority worldwide. And I get it. I do get that, but I don't feel connected to someone from Brazil who identifies as Black necessarily. There will sometimes be connections in our culture that are cool to see, whether it's the food we eat or the way we create art and how that art looks. That is really cool. How that African lineage has just lived through everything it was up against and has been so tenacious and thrived. But I don't necessarily feel like, I have to feel a familial connection now with every person that identifies as Black.
I think that's that struggle that you're like, I don't want to identify with struggle like that, because even across the diaspora, we all kind of experience a similar struggle. And so is that what she's saying we should?
I don't want to be identified by my struggles.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What y'all think? Am I thinking the right thing? Y'all tell me what y'all think and what y'all think about what I'm thinking. Because I'm thinking things. I don't know.
Very interesting.
It is. It is. Well, thank you for that, Alexis. What are we reading next week?
The Wedding by Dorothy West.
I think that's a great fiction to dive into after reading something like this. What do you think?
100% agree.
All right. Well, thank you all for listening to Lit Society. We'll see you next Thursday. Lit Society is brought to you by Alexis Honoria and Kari Herrera. Support the cause by leaving a 5-star review for our show on Apple Podcasts, along with a comment about why you absolutely love us. We love y'all too, Black and white.
Love you.
But we Black. If you've enjoyed what
we love all the races that have been socially constructed. Oh, okay.
If you've enjoyed what you just heard, tell it. We're going to get canceled. Tell a friend about Lit Society. Visit litsocietypod.com for show notes, this month's book list, and to sign up for our amazing email newsletter. And until next time, you guys,
read something.